Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut. It's our biweekly conversation in which AARP staff and volunteers talk to Connecticut decision makers about policies and programs that are of interest to older residents. My name is John Erlingheuser, and I'm the Director of Advocacy and Community Outreach for AARP Connecticut. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by one of our great AARP Connecticut volunteers, Tim Ryan. And Tim, thanks for being with us today. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do for AARP, where you're from, and a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm a CPA with an MBA in finance and was a finance director for a large multinational. I volunteered for several years with AARP in different areas, and I'm currently the lead volunteer for the financial security area.
Excellent. So we certainly do appreciate all of our great volunteers. And as I said, Tim is one of the best that we have. So thanks, Tim, for being with us. So it's also my pleasure to welcome State Representative Sean Scanlon from the 98th Assembly District. And he's also co-chairman of the legislature's Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. And Representative Scanlon, thanks for being with us. And can you tell us a little bit about your background outside of the legislature? You know, what towns encompass the 98th District, and maybe what other committees you might serve on in the legislature?
Yeah, well, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with AARP. As always, I am the state representative for the 90th District, which is the towns of Guilford and Branford. I grew up in the town of Guilford. My dad was a police officer. My mom ran a small business and was the first person in my family to go to college. I graduated from Boston College and came back to Connecticut after I graduated and worked for 10 years for Senator Murphy. At the time, he was just a congressman, and then he became a senator. And then I was elected to this job in 2014. So I'm serving in my fourth term. And as you noted, I am the chair of the Finance Committee right now. For the previous 4 years before 2020, I was the chair of the Insurance Committee and got to work very closely with AARP on a lot of issues I think we may get into in a little bit. So I won't spoil the plot lead there, but just be grateful to be here and always to engage with AARP and your members.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Scanlon. And Scanlon, and it really is our privilege and honor to be speaking with you. And as you said, you have worked very closely with us on a number of issues over the years. So why don't we talk a little bit about what it's like to be chair of the Finance and Revenue and Bonding Committee, and what maybe some of your priorities are for this legislative session.
Yeah, well, I had been the chair, as I said, of the Insurance Committee, which I think had 11 members on it. And then I went to chair the Finance Committee, which is the biggest committee in the legislature. So it was a bit of an adjustment for me to go from chairing one of the smaller committees in the legislature to one of the bigger ones. And to do it over Zoom was especially interesting, too, because usually the Finance Committee meets in one of the biggest hearing rooms of the Capitol and the LOB. And I was doing this all online, which was certainly an adjustment. But I was really excited when Speaker Ritter asked me to chair the committee. And the reason I was mostly excited was because there's nothing bigger in the state capitol than the budget, as you both know. And it touches everything in our state. It deals with all the issues that I personally care about. And it's, I think, most importantly, the thing that sets the tone for the state. And it's the thing that really gets the most attention that we do as a legislature. So to be able to be a relatively young member of the General Assembly and to have that level of responsibility was a great honor that was bestowed upon me. And last year, obviously, was a difficult year for us, but we ended up putting together a bipartisan state budget that was something that passed with support from the overwhelming majority of both parties. And as a guy who really is disgusted by the toxicity of our politics today, and who strives to try to find that common ground and bring people together rather than just beat up on each other all the time. I'm so proud of the fact that we were able to get that done. And, people often sort of say, hey, well, why is there a Finance Committee and an Appropriations Committee? And I think that's an important thing to talk about. So Connecticut, like most states, splits the budget process making into two committees. I chair the Finance Committee, which basically think of it as that's where the money is coming in. And then there's the Appropriations Committee, which is how the money goes out. And we work together throughout the year to sort of put together two packages, as they call them. And that package together of the Approps and Finance is the state budget. And so I handle the tax side of it, the revenue side of it, and also the bonding side of it, which is essentially the state's credit card and how we make investments in things like infrastructure and things of that nature. And again, it's the intersection of a lot of different policies that I care about, and I've had a lot of fun in my first year or so as the chair.
Excellent, excellent. That's really great because I don't think a lot of people understand kind of how that process works. When you think of the state budget, that there is one group of people that are working on, the financing piece, and one people that are sort of people that are working on the spending, and kind of the knack is right trying to get those two to kind of meet. So we know that's a tough one.
It is tough. We're talking about a $46 billion state budget, right? And that's over 2 years. We do our budgets in 2-year increments. And, the Schoolhouse Rock version of it really quick, and you all know this, but for your members, every odd numbered year, the governor comes before the legislature in February and he or she presents their budget. It then goes to finance on the tax side and it goes to appropriations on the spending. And then we work together to create the legislature's budget. When the committees sort of do their work throughout the spring months and the winter months, by April and May, both committees have to report a budget out of their committee. And that's when the leaders really step in here. So usually what happens is we do make some changes. The governor doesn't get everything he or she wants. Sometimes they like that, sometimes they don't. But at that point, you sit down and you negotiate. And that's where the art of the compromise comes in politics. And so, again, like I said, we were able to do that in a bipartisan way last year, which I think was a great message to the people of Connecticut that despite the tough time we're going through, that we're going to roll up our sleeves and try to solve these problems together, Democrat and Republican. And I think the fact that we were able to do that is hopefully a sign of what's possible to come. I know a lot of people are kind of really upset by politics these days, and they hate how divisive it is. But if we can show people that still it's possible to do that, if you just try to work together, I hope it will help people have the confidence that we can actually solve problems together still in government today in 2022.
Great. We appreciate that. And I know it's a tall order. So Tim, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I know that many people in state government are talking about different proposals around tax relief. And this is something that is a big priority for AARP and my fellow AARP members. So how do you see the tax relief debate taking shape during this session?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're just getting going with the session. So obviously it's very early on in the process, but it starts with people coming with ideas to the table. And as the finance chair, I've told everybody, I don't care whether you're a Democrat, Republican, a freshman member, or you've been up there for 25 years, everybody's ideas matter. And if you got good ideas, bring them to the table and let's talk about it. And so I really believe that a lot of this session will be about tax reform. It's just a question of what's going to be in that final tax package. I personally really care the most about the child tax credit, right? It's something that is very important to me. I think it can bring literally children in Connecticut out of poverty. And I think it can really help a lot of parents on the working and middle class side of things that are really struggling right now with the cost of goods due to inflation. And if we can lower their taxes, that's great. Now, a lot of people out there say, well, wait a minute, I don't have kids. That's not going to benefit me. Well, that's exactly why we need to look at other different things that can. I'll give you another good example, Tim, property taxes. I happen to live and represent a community in Guilford where we have a senior tax freeze in the town, which is a policy that they implemented 20, 30 years ago. It's great. It's helping a lot of seniors stay in their homes and afford it despite the never-ending increase of property tax bills. But not every town has that. And so one of the things that I think we need to look at, and I know the governor is really looking at this year, is can we get a better and more robust property tax credit that we can actually have for people so they can stay in their homes. When I ran for state rep in 2014, I was 27, I was very young. And I talked a lot about the fact that I thought the property tax was the single biggest thing hurting Connecticut because people that were my age couldn't afford to move back to their hometowns and buy a house there and raise a family. And people like my grandparents' generation couldn't afford to stay in the town that they raised their family in because the property taxes were getting too expensive. And so if the young people can't move back there and the seniors are leaving, that means the only people in the middle are getting squeezed. Those middle class families like the one that I now have 8 years later, where I have a 2-year-old son and I'm married and I bought my first house, a decade ago. And those increases just keep hurting us, right? And so for me, I really want to try to solve that problem this year. I know it's probably important to a lot of your members who are watching right now is, the property tax system is really tough. And I think if we can try to address that this year by upping the property tax credit that you get every year from the state, I think we can make a big difference in terms of making Connecticut a little more affordable, whether it's for young parents, for seniors, for anybody.
You bring up a really good point, Representative Scanlon, because people often look at and say, and I hate the term, they say the greedy geezers. We look at tax relief, and we want really tax relief to be based on equity, and we shouldn't be pitting the young and families with children against the old,
No.
because the way you laid it out is exactly how we see it, right? It's got to be equitable. We have to make sure relief gets to those, who need relief, and that's why things like, we hear the criticisms about the property tax credit on your income tax, but the whole intention of that when it was initially started, 20, 30 years ago was all about, kind of leveling the divide when it came to property taxes on motor vehicles, and that, you had people in big cities paying, so much more property tax on a car as opposed to somebody who might live in Darien with a more expensive car. So those are important things to look at. And for us, it's all about making sure that property tax relief, however it's done, is done in an equitable and sustainable fashion, right? Because we don't want to cripple, towns' ability to fund education, because that's a critical, important function. And most older folks have had kids in the school system at some point. So, I don't envy the position you're in, but I admire the fact that you're looking to do this in an equitable way. So we do appreciate that.
Yeah, in some cases, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, right? When you pull one piece, you have to place that. And you just brought up a great point, John, which is that, of course, you don't want to remove the tax base from the cities and towns because then they can't afford to do the services. But what else we need to work on simultaneous to this is regionalization, right? We have 169 different kingdoms. Every other state in the country, just about, they have county government, some sort of regional government. We're Connecticut, land of steady habits. We don't like doing that. That's fine. We've had a lot of debates in the legislature about regionalization, and a lot of those have been focused on the stick and not the carrot. They force the regionalization. They say, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. Last year, I took a different approach. I said, let's incentivize regionalization. So in a place like Guilford or Branford, where I work, does it make sense that there's one dog catcher for each one of those towns, that there's one animal control person, all these different duplicative services? If we can find ways to find savings, then maybe we wouldn't have to rely so much on jacking up the property tax every year. And if we did find ways to find savings amongst our neighboring towns, if we chose to do it, not if we were forced to do it, my bill would give them increased state funding to reward the fact they were working collaboratively with their neighbors. And so, one of the things I think we need to think about going forward is not just how to make the property tax more affordable, but how to lower the property tax for people. And one way to do that is to try to get more state revenue to towns if they are finding ways to work together and to get rid of that 169 town approach. Everyone loves where they live. I love the town of Guilford, but there's nothing wrong if we begin to share some services with towns like Branford and Madison that are around us that don't harm our quality of life at all. They just save savings for the towns at a time when the towns just don't have a lot of money coming in.
So, that's great. And this is a really great discussion around tax relief. And I'm glad this is a priority for you and for a lot of folks in the legislature. And finding that formula is going to be kind of, the knack. But I know you're going to get somewhere with that. But, what are some of the other maybe priorities you have in the Finance Committee, other than just, we talked about taxes, and, that you think might come up or that might be a priority for you aside from like the child tax credit and maybe the property tax credit? Are there any other big priorities you have for the committee this year?
Yeah, again, we're just trying to figure out, what those priorities are. We're very early on in the process. I'll give you another one, though. One thing that comes up a lot from my constituents, and especially from seniors, is the inflexibility of tax collectors on waiving things like interest. I've had a number of terrible situations happen to me where just last year I had a senior couple, both of them were in the 80s. They called me up and they said, Sean, somebody literally stole my property tax check from my mailbox, did some sort of editing to it and cashed it. And I didn't realize that because I just thought that it was going to the tax collector until the tax collector called me and said, hey, we never got your check. And when I explained that and had the police report, they actually found the guy who did this. They went to the tax collector with the Guilford police, and the tax collector said, sorry, my hands are tied, I can't help you. And so one of the things that I did last year, and one of the things I'll do again this year, is to create some level of discretion for the tax collectors when it comes to things like this. There's a lot of hardship stories out there. I've heard a lot of that from homebound seniors who are afraid to go out in COVID. They don't want to send the check because of things like this and identity theft. can we find ways that if there is some sort of accident, that there can be some kind of discretion? And again, that may seem like not a big deal to some people, but to some people, it's everything. And I think for me, my approach to government has always been, maybe this isn't the biggest thing to you or a policymaker, but to the guy that called me that got screwed over with his wife by some criminal who, stole their mailbox and stole their mail and then took that check, it means the world to them. And so there's a bunch of things like that I am looking forward to working on. But at the end of the day, the Finance Committee, the biggest thing that we do is the budget, and that's going to spend most of my time working on that this year.
Excellent, excellent. Tim, you want to?
Yeah, I've testified before the General Assembly in the past. Can you tell us some of the ways that the public can stay informed with the work of the General Assembly and some of the ways that they can participate in the process? And has it changed any with the COVID protocols?
Yeah, well, in the last 2 years, we have been doing most of our public hearings on Zoom. And some people find that easier because they can sort of stay home and they don't have to drive to Hartford. Some people are frustrated by the technology, but again, we're learning. And I think that the public hearings this session will all be on Zoom. I do think that you will start to see the legislature do a lot more in-person stuff in the spring, when hopefully the numbers with COVID go down a little bit. We can kind of get back to our usual routine. But I would say the best thing I could ever tell anybody, every legislator, there's 187 of us, 151 reps, 36 senators. Every one of us has a different style, a different personality, different way of interacting with people. But my basic advice is call your state rep, call your state senator, send them an email, say, hey, I'm an AARP volunteer and I want to get to know you and I want you to get to know me. And I want to talk to you about what it is that I am concerned with and the AARP is concerned with this year. And I always value that because as an elected official, you have to know a little bit about a lot of different things. And for a lot of issues, my knowledge is really only skin deep because I don't have the time or expertise to really learn a lot about that. So nothing makes me happier than when a guy like Tim, who's a very smart guy, who's got a lot of background in finance and a lot of good knowledge, comes in and says, hey, Scanlon, this is what we're working on this year. This is what's important to me. This is why it matters. And it really gives me that information because if I don't have Tim coming to me or John coming to me, I may not know about some of these issues unless you are the ones that are coming to me to tell. So I would always say, a lot of people say, yeah, you know what? They're busy and I don't want to bother them. Well, that's what we're here for. We're here to hear from you. We're here to get educated on what's important to you. And I would just strongly encourage you to always reach out to your member of the legislature and help them help you. And they won't know how to do that unless you're the one telling them what's important to you.
And that's great advice. And our volunteers love to be able to hear that right from the source. So let me just ask you one more question, and maybe I'll combine two things into one. So in the past, you mentioned you were chair of the Insurance Committee, and we worked very closely with you on legislation to try to lower the cost of prescription drug prices. So yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit about that issue and why it's so important to you. And, I know we've had some successes with you on some big things in that area in the past. And then maybe anything else, maybe not finance related, and in addition to prescription drugs that are a priority for you, just as one of the members of the legislature.
Yeah, well, lowering the cost of drugs to me is the biggest thing that we can do to help people, not just seniors, but all people, right? And I can't tell you, when I worked on that issue for 4 years, I can't tell you how many horrible stories I heard from people, whether they were 13-year-old diabetics on insulin or 85-year-old people on 5 different drugs, having to ration their drugs because they couldn't afford them, having to pick between eating and paying for their drugs. That's not America. That's not the America I know and love. And I think we need to do way better than that. And so I've dedicated a lot of my time in the legislature to this. In 2018, I worked with Kevin Lembo, our recently departed state comptroller, to pass Connecticut's first prescription drug transparency law. AARP was very involved in pushing that bill. It basically says that every year, the biggest pharmaceutical price increases, the companies that are behind those have to tell us in writing why it is and justify that they increase that drug. We need to go a step further. I personally favor creating a drug review board that would take all of those bad actors and actually look at ways that we can force them to lower those prices. Maryland is a state that does that. Obviously, I worked very hard in 2020 to cap the cost of insulin. And we've created the best insulin cost copay cap in the nation at $25 per month supply and $100 for all of actual insulin supplies, which is the only state in the country to do that. We have to go more into that. Now, as your members know, there's a lot happening at the federal level about this. President Biden and Congress have talked about doing things like requiring Medicare to negotiate for drug prices, something that just about every other country on planet Earth does, except for us. And I really support that. I think it can make a big, big difference. But as we've been talking a lot about partisanship and divisiveness, Washington is at a standstill almost all the time. And I'm not sure that the president's bill that includes that Medicare negotiation will get across the finish line, which is all the more reason why states really can play a big role here and why states really matter. So I'm not saying ignore Congress and you should talk to your federal congressional delegation, but states really can get a lot of good stuff done. The prescription drug price transparency law that I passed in 2018 could probably never pass Congress because of all the special interest money that is flooding the halls of Congress and stopping good things like that from happening. And so really pay attention to the states. And if you are concerned about drug prices, then get engaged with AARP, find out what's going on their agenda, and then find a way to talk to your members about that. Anna Dorgazi and I and Nora worked really closely together in 2018 to do this, and we were in the trenches. And I was getting so many good stories from them about AARP members that were saying, hey, this is what happened to me. And when I went to battle against the big drug companies that, of course, were spending millions of dollars to stop this, I had your story, and your stories were powerful. And that's what ultimately, I think, helped us get that bill across the finish line.
And we really appreciate that. And we're coming close to the end, but I would be remiss if I didn't say, obviously, some big wins working with you and your co-chairs over in insurance over the years on prescription drugs. You mentioned the insulin, you mentioned the transparency issues, and those were great wins. I also just want to say, on behalf of our members, to thank you as well, because in the finance committee, you were one of the champions that kind of not only held the line in ensuring that we phase out the taxation of retirement income, which, people don't realize it's, older residents in Connecticut actually contribute more to the economy than many people that are still in the workforce because of the fact that they have to spend the resources to survive, which is why so much of the time when we fight about stimulus going to retirees, it's important because that money generally goes right back into the economy. But not only that, but you worked and got that expanded to additional types of retirement income. So we were so pleased with that, and I know our membership thanks you for that, because that's always been one of their top priorities. And so we really appreciate the fact that you were able to do that. So with that, I don't know if you have any closing words you want to impart upon us.
Yeah, well, I just say, again, this was a fun conversation. I'm so grateful to be asked to do it. And hopefully all you enjoyed your coffee and tea with us today. But seriously, take my advice to heart, is let your voice be heard. Nothing is more important than that. If you don't know your state rep or your state senator, pick up the phone, call them, tell them Sean Scanlon told you to do it, and sit down with them, have coffee and tea with them, get to know them, and try to find a way, going forward that you can keep in touch with them, because it really is so important. And what's most important about that is if you already have the relationship and it's not based on telling them something, months later when something else comes up and you call them, it's not the first time you've ever talked to them. And so you've already built that credibility and that relationship with them, so that when a big vote is happening and they're getting it from both sides and they have to make a decision, they're going to know who you are, and they're going to say, you know what, if Tim and John is saying that this is the truth, then I got to believe them because they're good guys and I've talked to them before. And so my only advice is get engaged, get involved, be a part of the change that we have to do in the state of Connecticut to move forward and advance these issues. And again, just grateful for the time and to be asked here today, and look forward to working with AARP in the future.
Appreciate it. Tim, you want to say anything?
That's it. Thanks, Representative.
We appreciate all of you joining us today, and we especially want to thank our very special guest, Representative Sean Scanlon, who is chair of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee of the state legislature, and appreciate all the great work he's done for us on so many issues, and for his willingness to be so accessible to our members over the years. So once again, that will bring another edition of Coffee and Tea with AARP to a close. We thank you all for joining us this morning, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. Thank you.